The ordinary bus ride that turned into a life-altering lesson unfolded in a way none of the passengers could have anticipated. It started like any other evening commute. The bus screeched to a halt at the corner of Oak Street and Elm Avenue, its doors creaking open to welcome a steady stream of tired commuters. Among them was an elderly man with graying hair and a weathered face, his movements slow yet purposeful. He leaned heavily on a cane, its surface worn smooth from years of use, and carried a small bag of groceries. As he made his way to the back of the bus, he took his time, his every step deliberate, as if the weight of his years had taught him the value of pacing through life. He settled into a seat near the window, resting his cane against his knee and gazing out at the fading daylight. His eyes seemed to carry the stories of decades past, of struggles and triumphs that had shaped him into the quiet figure he was today. The bus hummed to life again, filled with the soft murmur of voices, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional ring of a phone. But amidst all the noise, the elderly man remained a beacon of stillness, observing the world outside, with a calm that only came with time. No one seemed to pay him much mind, save for a few curious glances from children or a nod from a fellow passenger. But not all eyes on the bus were filled with indifference. As the bus neared its next stop, the doors swung open and a group of teenagers bounded aboard, their laughter ringing out with the sort of energy that only youth could bring. There were 4 of them, each with their own swagger, backpacks slung over their shoulders, and attitudes to match. They looked for trouble, and trouble they would find. One of them, a lanky boy with a baseball cap turned backward, nudged his friend and pointed toward the elderly man at the back. "Yo, check him out," he muttered, his voice loud enough to make heads turn. The group laughed, their eyes narrowing as they approached the man. His calmness seemed to irk them, a challenge they couldn't resist. The tall boy in the cap leaned toward the old man, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, old man, you lost or something? Retirement home down the street?" The group burst into laughter, but the elderly man remained silent, his eyes still fixed on the world outside. His lack of reaction only fueled their taunts. And one of the other boys, shorter and stockier, chimed in. "That cane for walking or holding you up," he sneered. More laughter followed, but the old man did not flinch. The atmosphere on the bus shifted. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others lowered their heads, pretending not to hear. The teens pressed on, their jabs becoming more pointed, more personal. "Bet he's got some cash in that bag," one of them said. But as the laughter grew louder, the elderly man made his move. For the first time, he straightened his posture, his hand tightening around his cane. There was a stillness about him now, a quiet power that even the teenagers seemed to sense. The boy in the cap leaned closer, his smirk widening. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" he mocked, tapping the cane with his sneer. But the old man's gaze didn't waver. "You always find fun in bothering strangers?" the man asked, his voice low but steady. The question hung in the air, and for a moment the teenagers paused, unsure of how to respond. The boy in the hoodie, still brimming with bravado, shot back, "What's it to you?" But the elderly man's eyes locked onto his, piercing with a calm intensity that seemed to still the very air around them. "I've met boys like you before," the old man said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that silenced even the loudest of the teens. Different time, different place. They didn't laugh so much when they learned what real fear feels like. The words were simple, but they struck like a punch to the gut, leaving the teens uncertain, their bravado slipping away. The boy in the cap scoffed, desperate to reclaim control. "What, you're gonna scare us with your cane?" he sneered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The old man, unmoved, leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You think this cane is what holds me up?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "No, what holds me up is something far stronger." The bus creaked as it turned a corner, but the man remained steady, his cane a silent anchor to the floor. The boy's defiance faltered. "Yeah, what's that?" he scoffed, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The old man took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over the group. "When I was your age, I carried something much heavier than a cane," he began, his voice steady. "A rifle. Through jungles half a world away. I was 19, barely older than you. Vietnam." The word hung in the air like a heavy fog, silencing the entire bus. The teens stood frozen, their laughter now replaced with a palpable discomfort. "We didn't have time for jokes back then," the man continued. "We had to grow up fast, too fast. Some of us didn't come back at all, and those of us who did, we carried more than just our gear. We carried scars. Some you can see, most you can't." The smallest of the group shifted uncomfortably, his bravado long gone. The boy in the hoodie looked down, his smirk replaced by a solemn expression. The elderly man leaned forward slightly, his voice filled with quiet authority. "Let me tell you about fear," he said, his tone unshaken. "It's not about being mocked on a bus. It's about hearing the snap of a twig behind you and not knowing if it's a soldier or a trap. It's about watching your friend fall beside you, knowing you can't stop to help." The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on the teenagers like an unseen force. The boy in the hoodie finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Did you lose people out there?" he asked, his tone tinged with remorse. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "More than I care to count," he said softly. "Good men, brave men, not just in the war. Some came back but couldn't leave the fight behind. You'd be surprised how fragile strength can be when it's tested the wrong way." The air in the bus was thick with the weight of his words, and the teenagers, once brimming with arrogance, now stood silent, humbled. The boy in the cap mumbled, "We didn't mean anything to it," but his voice was small, barely above a whisper. The old man nodded, his gaze softening. "I know you didn't, but words have weight. You never know what someone's carrying." The bus slowed as it reached the next stop, and the old man leaned back in his seat, his cane resting once more on his knee. The bus doors hissed open, but no one moved. The teenagers, once so full of energy, stood still, their bravado completely gone. The passengers, who had been silent witnesses to the exchange, now offered small nods of understanding, their respect for the elderly man growing. As the bus continued its journey, the teens made their way to the front, their heads lowered. They exited in silence, their laughter and bravado a distant memory. The old man, though, remained unchanged, his quiet strength a lesson to everyone aboard. And as the bus hummed toward its final destination, the passengers carried with them more than just their belongings. They carried the story of a man who had seen it all, and whose quiet dignity had taught them all the value of respect, humility, and strength. A young woman sitting across from him broke the silence, her voice soft. "Thank you," she said, her words carrying a weight of gratitude that the elderly man acknowledged with a slight nod. "I did what I had to," he replied simply. "That's all any of us can do. But what matters is what you do now with the life you have." The young woman smiled faintly, then turned back to the window, her thoughts heavy with reflection. As the old man rose to leave, he paused by the door and turned to face the passengers one last time. "Be kind to each other," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "You never know the battle someone's fighting." And with that, he stepped off the bus, leaving behind a silent reverence that would linger long after the doors had closed. The bus pulled away. But for the rest of the ride, the passengers carried something more than just the memory of their journey. They carried a story, a reminder that strength is found not in power, but in the quiet dignity of those who have endured the unthinkable and lived to tell the tale.